My name is Jacob. I am 120 years old. And for 100 of those years, I have known nothing but pain. I wake up every morning in a body that feels like a crumbling house. My bones creak like old floorboards. My muscles tremble with even the smallest movements. My hands are stiff, my legs, well, they're no longer mine. They were taken in a war whose name people no longer mention, fought for reasons no one remembers. For many, old age is a privilege. For me, it has been a sentence. I have no family left, no friends, no home. The world I was born into has disappeared. Streets have changed. Faces are unfamiliar. Even the language sounds different now. Time has taken everything from me, except my memories, and those memories have become my greatest burden. I was born into suffering. The first thing I remember is hunger. Not the kind of hunger you get when you skip lunch. I mean the kind that gnaws at your ribs and makes your stomach feel like it's trying to eat itself. I remember lying in the dirt, watching other children play while I clutched my empty belly. I lost my parents before I ever knew what safety felt like. I watched them die. I still hear my mother's last scream, still see my father's blood on my shirt. I was just a boy, but the world forced me to become something else, something harder, something colder. I grew up on the streets. Cold nights under bridges, rain dripping through torn fabric, rats nibbling at whatever crumbs I could find. People walked past me like I was made of smoke. No one saw me. No one cared. I learned early that the world doesn't hand you kindness. You have to claw for it, beg for it, bleed for it. As a young man, I found work, if you could call it that. Construction sites, mines, fields. My hands bled daily. My back cracked under the weight of bricks, barrels, and expectations. But I worked, not for ambition, not for pride, just to eat, just to survive. And still, life never gave me peace. Then came the war. It swallowed my generation whole. One moment I was a laborer, the next a soldier. I saw things no man should see. I heard screams that no silence can ever erase. I lost brothers in arms. I lost friends. I lost my legs. I lost a part of myself that believed in anything. And yet I lived. I returned to a world that no longer recognized me or wanted me. The people I fought to protect had forgotten my name. The country I bled for offered only cold stares and endless paperwork. My wife, Maria, held me close the night I came home. I cried into her shoulder. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Her touch said it all. You're home. You're safe. For a while, I dared believe life had more to offer. Maria and I built a life from the scraps the world left us. We had children. We laughed. We danced in the kitchen, her feet on mine, because I couldn't stand properly. Those were the golden years, brief but brilliant. But time is a thief. Maria died first, then my sons, then my daughter. One by one, I buried them. Cancer, accidents, a war that claimed my grandson. I have stood at more graves than I can count, each one carved a piece from my soul. Now I live in a small room in a forgotten care facility. The walls are beige. The food is soft. The air smells of disinfectant and loneliness. Nurses come and go. Most are kind, but none of them know me. To them, I am just a number, a chart, a task. Every morning I wonder, is today the day I go to sleep and don't wake up? And sometimes I wish it was. But each morning I wake up, and so I live. People think surviving is just about the body, but survival is in the spirit. My body has failed me many times, but my spirit has never broken. You may ask, how, Jacob? How did you keep going through all of that pain? There was a song, not a song from the radio, not a hymn from church. A song I made in my head, a melody I hummed when my stomach growled, a rhythm I tapped when I lay in hospital beds. Lyrics that changed as I changed, but always meant the same thing. You are still here. You are still alive. You will survive. This song has no title, no sheet music. It exists only in me, but it has carried me through every trial. And tonight, though my voice shakes, though my breath is short, though my limbs are weak, I will sing it. Not because I want applause, but because I want the world to know I am still here. I am still alive, and I will survive. After I finished speaking that night, something shifted. I could feel it. The room, once filled with quiet whispers and clinking utensils, had become still. The kind of stillness you feel in your bones. Not the silence of boredom or formality. No, this was reverence. A hush that falls when people finally hear what they didn't even know they needed to. I looked up from my chair and saw the others in the care home looking back at me. Some had tears in their eyes. Some had their hands over their mouths. A nurse stood by the door, frozen, a medication tray still in her grip. They weren't reacting to an old man rambling. They were reacting to truth, because pain recognizes pain. After that night, people started visiting me. Staff members, other residents. They asked questions, real ones, not the polite, surface-level things they usually asked out of routine. What was her name? Your wife? Did you ever think of ending it all? How did you forgive the world? I didn't always have answers. Sometimes I just shook my head, but I listened, and they listened too. For once, I wasn't just an old man waiting for time to run out. I became something else, a mirror. People saw their own losses in my stories, their own scars in my wounds. There was a young nurse, Amelia. She reminded me of my granddaughter. Same brown eyes, same way of speaking, like everything she said had a sprinkle of hope in it. One day, she sat with me during lunch. You know, she said gently, I think your story is helping people heal, even if it hurts to hear. I laughed. It hurt to laugh, but I did it anyway. Stories don't heal, I told her. What heals is knowing we're not alone in our pain. That's what makes the difference. From that day on, she came to my room every evening with a notebook. She asked questions, and I spoke. She wrote it all down. I told her about Maria, about the day I met her in a bakery while delivering flour sacks during the war. She was behind the counter, humming some forgotten tune. She gave me a free roll, even though I had nothing to pay with. I think you need this more than me, she said. She had flour on her nose. That night, I knew I would marry her. I told Amelia about our children, our daughter who used to sing lullabies to the moon, and our sons who carved wooden toys out of tree branches because we couldn't afford the real ones. I told her about the night Maria and I danced under the stars while our kids slept on the porch. Amelia cried sometimes while writing. I didn't mind. Tears are sacred. Then I told her about the bad days, too. About the hospitals, the wheelchairs, the guilt, the way I used to scream at the sky, asking why I had to keep living, when everyone I loved was already gone. And the nights I almost didn't make it to morning. Why didn't you give up? Amelia asked once, her pen hovering above the page. I thought about it. The question wasn't new, but it always felt new. Because I was afraid that if I died, I said slowly, no one would remember them. My family, my brothers in the war, my friends. If I go, who tells their stories? She nodded, her eyes wet. That became our mission. Not just to tell my story, but ours. The stories of people who couldn't speak anymore. Stories erased by time, by silence, by shame. We called the notebook Echoes. In the following weeks, Amelia read excerpts aloud in the common room. Residents gathered around like children around a campfire. They wept. They clapped. They shared their own stories, too. Suddenly, I wasn't the only one singing through the pain. One day, an old man named Roger came to my room. He had barely spoken a word since I arrived at the care home. But that day, he looked me in the eye. I lost my son, he said. Cancer. 20 years ago. I never told anyone because I didn't want to be pitted. But after hearing your story, I realized I still miss him every day. We didn't talk much more. We didn't need to. We sat in silence, two broken men, bonded by the weight of memory. It was in these moments that I realized I was still useful, still needed. Maybe I couldn't walk or work or dance, but I could remember. And remembering is its own kind of power. I remember the song, too, the one that had kept me alive. It had grown over time. The melody was richer now, fuller. The words had matured. It wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about honoring what had come before, about carrying the flame even when the wind howled. Emilia asked me to write the lyrics down. I did, slowly, my hand trembling. But every letter felt like a promise. I walked the road of sorrow, 100 years too long. She read it aloud the next day. Everyone listened. When she finished, the room was silent. Then Roger began to hum. Others followed. Some clapped their hands softly in rhythm. And then I began to sing. My voice cracked. My breath was short. But the words came anyway. They always did. I wasn't singing alone. I was joined by every soul who had ever felt abandoned, broken, or forgotten. I was joined by memories of Maria, of my children, of my brothers. My song wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to all of us. I will survive. I have survived, not just in body, but in spirit, in memory, in legacy. And that night, as I drifted to sleep, I didn't wonder if I'd wake up the next morning. For once, I was content, because I knew that even if I didn't open my eyes again, the song would keep playing. I never expected to become anything more than a forgotten man in a forgotten room, but the world had other plans. Weeks passed since Emilia started documenting my memories. The notebook she called Echoes became more than just paper and ink. It became a window, first into my soul, then into the hearts of everyone around me. Word began to spread. The director of the care facility called me into her office one morning. It took 2 nurses to get me into my wheelchair, and I grumbled the whole way, assuming I had broken some rule by telling stories too loudly or singing off-key. But when I rolled in, she smiled. Not a forced, polite smile. A real one. "Jacob, we were contacted by a local community center," she said. "They heard about your story, and they want you to come speak." I blinked. Speak? In public? I can barely breathe, let alone give speeches. "You won't be alone. Emilia will be there, and will help with everything." At first, I said no. What would I even say that hadn't already been written in that notebook? What would a room full of strangers want from a man who had outlived his usefulness? But then I remembered Roger and the way his voice trembled when he said his son's name for the first time in decades. I remembered the nurses who cried softly while listening to my song. I remembered Emilia's quiet persistence. So I said yes. They scheduled it for a Saturday afternoon. I spent the week rehearsing lines I never wrote, humming melodies that had long been part of my bones. Emilia helped me pick out an old suit someone had donated. The pants didn't quite fit, and the tie was too wide. But it didn't matter. The night before, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling and wondered if I would fail, if I'd forget what to say, if my lungs would give out mid-sentence. But when the moment came, something inside me clicked. They wheeled me up to the front of a small community hall. The crowd wasn't large, maybe 30 people, but every face was turned toward me with anticipation. I cleared my throat, and I spoke. I told them about the war, about hunger, about Maria, about how it feels to bury your children, about what it means to keep living when you have every reason not to. People think survival is about winning. I told them, but it's not. It's about showing up, even when everything hurts, especially when everything hurts. Then I sang. The song came out quiet first, fragile like a candle flickering against wind. But as the words filled the room, I could feel them catch. People sat straighter. Some closed their eyes. Others mouthed the words. When I finished, they clapped. I didn't cry. I smiled. After that, the requests kept coming. Churches, libraries, veterans groups, schools. Every week, someone else invited me to share my story. Sometimes I spoke in person. Other times, Emilia read my words aloud while I sat and listened. Either way, the message spread. One evening, a teenager approached me after an event. "Mr. Jacob," he said, "I was going to end my life last month. I thought no one understood how broken I felt. But your story, it made me feel seen. Thank you." He hugged me. I felt his tears on my shoulder. And that was when I knew my pain hadn't been wasted. My survival meant something beyond myself. I was living proof that even the most broken souls could keep breathing. Back at the care home, things changed too. Residents who once kept to themselves started sharing meals. Staff members began singing parts of my song during rounds. One nurse brought in a guitar and played chords while we all hummed together. We started calling it the evening fire. Each night, we gathered in the lounge, residents, staff, sometimes even guests. We shared stories, played music, read poetry. We laughed, we wept, we healed. The facility had never been livelier, not because of me, but because everyone realized they weren't alone. I began writing letters too. Letters to the families of the men I served with. Letters to my children's friends. Letters to people I had wronged. Letters to myself. Each one was a thread, stitching me back together. And through it all, I kept singing. One evening, as the first snowfall dusted the windows, Amelia brought news. A producer from a public radio station heard one of your recordings. She said, eyes glowing, they want to air it. Nationwide. I stared at her. They want to what? Share your song. Your voice. They think people need to hear it. Part of me was terrified. My voice was raspy. My phrasing was uneven. But another part of me, the part that had once crawled out of rubble to keep breathing, whispered, do it. So I did. Amelia helped me record the song in one take. I sang every word like it was the last thing I'd ever say. And when it aired 2 weeks later, something incredible happened. Letters poured in, hundreds, from strangers across the country, veterans, widows, teenagers, grandparents, nurses. They shared their own stories, thanked me for mine. Some sent photos. Others sent art, poems, gifts. One child drew a picture of me as a superhero. You have the power to survive anything, she wrote. That's better than flying. I hung it on my wall. It wasn't about fame. It was about connection. I had become more than a man waiting for the end. I had become a bridge between generations, between pain and healing, between silence and song. And even though my body continued to weaken, even though sleep came more often and lasted longer, I no longer feared it. Because now, if the end came, I wouldn't go unnoticed. I would go remembered. I would go surrounded by voices echoing the song I once thought only I could hear. Winter lingered that year. The cold bit sharper. The nights stretched longer. But inside the walls of the care facility, warmth bloomed like spring in slow motion. A warmth that came not from blankets or heaters, but from connection, from shared breath, and from a story that refused to end. My body was failing me faster now. I needed help for even the smallest tasks. Breathing took effort. Speaking took energy I no longer had in abundance. But my heart, it beat steady. And my soul, it hummed that same old melody. I often stared out the window, watching the snow fall, letting memories wrap around me like a quilt. Sometimes they came gently, Maria's laugh, my daughter's lullabies. Other times they came sharp and sudden, gunfire, the cries of war, the silence of empty cribs. But I welcomed them all, because they meant I was still living. One evening, Amelia came to my room. She was different. Her smile held something behind it, something deeper than usual. I've been offered a scholarship, she said, to study music therapy. In another state, my breath caught for a moment. I had always known she wouldn't stay forever. No one does. But the thought of her leaving left an ache. You should go, I whispered. You're meant to do more than write my stories. Tears filled her eyes. She knelt beside me and took my hand. You changed my life, Jacob. No, I said, you gave me back mine. We didn't say goodbye that night. We didn't need to. The next day, she gathered the residents for one last evening fire. People brought candles. Some wore shirts printed with the words, I will survive. Amelia sat at the piano. She played softly, then sang the song we built together. My voice, pre-recorded, joined hers through the speakers. I listened from my chair, wrapped in a blanket, letting the harmony wrap around me. Everyone sang. Everyone cried. And in that moment, I realized something beautiful. The song no longer needed me. It had become bigger than me. Stronger, wiser, alive in others. That night, I dreamed. I stood on a quiet hill, Green grass underfoot, blue sky above. Maria stood beside me, smiling, radiant as ever. Our children laughed in the distance. The wind carried my song, played by unseen hands. I woke with a smile. The nurses found me the next morning, peaceful, eyes closed, the notebook echoes resting on my lap. I was gone, but not lost, because when Amelia returned years later, now Dr. Amelia Ray, she brought a group of students to the care home. She shared my story, my song. They held another evening fire. A new voice sang the words. A new soul hummed the tune. And still I was there, in the laughter, in the music, in every person who dared to keep going, even when it hurt. Because survival isn't just about breath. It's about legacy. And legacy, if shared, never dies. So if you ever feel lost, broken, unseen, remember this. There once was a man who lived 120 years, who lost everything, who was forgotten by the world, but never gave up. He had nothing but a song. And with that song, he survived. And now, so can you. I will survive. You will survive. We all will.